just occupation, as if the air itself remembered what it was like to be lived in. I started noticing lights not turning on. That would have been too obvious. Instead, reflections, a faint glow behind a sealed door, a flicker in a stairwell mirror where no bulb worked anymore. Once, around 3:30, I heard a radio playing. It came from somewhere deep inside the building, a muffled voice, a song I didn't recognize. When I walked toward it, the sound faded. When I stopped, it returned, always distant, always just out of reach. That night, I stayed seated and didn't follow it. Later, I learned that was the right choice. I began to feel watched, not in the way people usually mean it. There was no sense of danger, no fear, just awareness, like entering a room where a conversation had already been going on and suddenly stopping. One night, I spoke out loud without meaning to. "Hello." The word echoed through the stairwell. Something echoed back, not my voice, not a response, just the sound of breathing. I didn't answer again. From then on, things changed. Objects began to move slightly. Chairs that were never where I left them. Doors that weren't fully closed anymore. Once I found the kettle warm when I hadn't used it. I told myself someone else was coming in at night. Another guard, a squatter, anyone, but the cameras never showed anyone. Around the third week, I noticed something worse. The figures, at first, they were barely there. Reflections that didn't line up, shapes at the edge of vision, someone standing near the mailboxes, head lowered, unmoving. When I looked directly, there was nothing. Then one night, someone stayed. She stood near the stairwell entrance, elderly, wearing a coat that belonged to another decade. Her posture was tired but patient. She didn't look at me. She looked past me. I froze. Minutes passed. She didn't move, didn't fade, didn't vanish. Finally, she spoke. "You're late," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't hollow. It wasn't distorted. It was ordinary. I was worried. I should have stayed silent. Instead, I answered, "I'm sorry." She smiled, relieved. That was the moment everything crossed the line. After that night, she began to appear regularly. Not every shift, not on schedule, but often enough that I stopped telling myself it was a one-time hallucination. Sometimes she stood near the stairwell entrance. Sometimes by the mailboxes, once sitting on the steps, hands folded neatly in her lap. She never looked surprised to see me. She spoke as if I had always been there. "You should wear something warmer," she said one night. "The draft is terrible here." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "Are you waiting for someone?" I asked carefully. "My husband," she said. "He works late." That was when I understood something was wrong. No one worked late anymore. Not in that building. Not in that decade. Her coat, her shoes, the way she spoke. Everything about her belonged to another time. And yet she spoke as if nothing had changed. I didn't correct her. After that, others started to appear. A man stood near the trash chute every night at the same hour, keys jingling softly in his hand. He never threw anything away. Just stood there, waiting, as if someone had stepped in front of him moments earlier. A child appeared on the second-floor landing, always by the window, counting passing cars under his breath. He never finished. An old couple sat on a bench in the courtyard just before dawn. They leaned toward each other but never touched. Their conversation was silent, lips moving without sound. None of them acknowledged each other, and none of them noticed me until I spoke. That was the pattern. As long as I stayed quiet, they existed, separately, trapped in their routines, repeating gestures, habits, final moments stretched into something longer, thinner, fragile. But the moment I spoke, they turned, not aggressively, not suddenly, just enough to register me as part of the environment, like furniture that had started talking. The woman with the coat began asking questions. "Did you bring the bread? Have you seen my neighbor? What time is it?" Each question pulled me further in. I answered carefully, choosing words that wouldn't disturb her version of reality. I told her it was late, not how late, that her husband would be home soon, not that he never would. She smiled when I spoke. When I stayed silent, she seemed anxious. That was when I realized something else. They needed interaction, not company, confirmation. The building itself reacted. The more I spoke to them, the more physical the changes became. Doors began opening on their own. The smell of cooking lingered longer. Radios turned on without being plugged in. One night, I found a half-filled glass of water on the table in the guard room. I didn't drink it. I started sleeping during the day and dreaming about the building at night, about corridors that stretched too long, about stairwells that looped back into themselves, about knocking on doors that no longer existed. I asked the morning guard if he'd ever seen anyone inside at night. He avoided my eyes. "You're doing fine," he said. "Just keep the log updated." I checked the logbook again. The entries had changed tone, less procedural, more personal. 2:10, she was worried again. 3:40, he waited by the window. 5 o'clock, everything is calmer when you speak. I never wrote those lines. I tried staying silent for an entire shift. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. The spirits became restless, movement sped up, patterns broke. The woman walked back and forth between floors. The man at the trash chute began rattling his keys loudly, impatiently. The child counted faster, voice trembling. The building groaned, pipes rattled, lights flickered violently. At 4:30, something knocked on the door of the guard room. Slow, polite. I didn't answer. The knocking continued for 20 minutes. When I finally opened the door, no one was there. But the hallway was warmer, lived in, as if people had just passed through. That night, I understood the rule. They didn't know they were dead. They knew only that something was wrong, that time didn't move, that people didn't arrive, that routines never completed. And when someone acknowledged them, truly acknowledged them, the discomfort eased, for them, not for me. The next morning, I found an old resident list tucked into the logbook. Names, apartment numbers, dates of death. I recognized every single one. The woman's name was there. So was mine. After I saw my name on the list, I stopped sleeping properly. I tried telling myself it was a coincidence, a clerical error, someone with the same first name, the same last initial. But the date next to it was empty. No birth year, no death year, just my name and an apartment number I had never lived in. Apartment 417. I didn't check it that night. For the first time since I started the job, I left early. I told the morning guard I wasn't feeling well. He looked at me longer than usual, as if deciding whether to say something. In the end, he only nodded. "Get some rest," he said. "You'll feel better after tonight." That phrasing stayed with me. At home, the silence felt wrong, too clean, too empty. I kept listening for the building, for the distant hum, the low presence I had grown used to. Without it, my thoughts spiraled. When I closed my eyes, I saw stairwells. I dreamed of the woman standing by the mailboxes, looking past me, whispering my name as if she had always known it. I dreamed of the child at the window, counting cars that never passed. I woke up with the smell of fried onions in my apartment and no explanation for it. I returned the next night. The building felt pleased. The lights in the entrance flickered once, then stabilized. The air was warmer than it should have been. Familiar. I felt a strange relief stepping inside, like returning somewhere I hadn't realized I missed. They were waiting, not gathered, not watching, just present, more of them now. Figures in doorways, shapes on landings. A man leaning against the wall near the elevator, humming softly to himself. They didn't speak until I did. "Good evening," I said quietly. Several heads turned. The woman smiled. "There you are," she said. "We thought you weren't coming." The way she said "we" unsettled me more than anything else so far. I asked about apartment 417. She looked confused. "That's yours," she said. "Has been for years." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "I don't live here," I said. Her smile faded, not into anger but concern. "You shouldn't joke like that," she replied. "It's not healthy." Others murmured in agreement. That night, the building showed me things. Doors opened to rooms that weren't empty anymore. Furniture stood where none had been before. Old photographs appeared on walls. Faded family portraits. Wedding pictures. Birthdays frozen in yellowed frames. Lone of the faces were mine. But I was always there. In reflections, in mirrors. In the background of glass surfaces, standing slightly out of focus. Time started slipping. My watch stopped working. My phone lost signal the moment I entered the building. I didn't regain it until morning. The clocks in the stairwells all showed different times, none of them correct. I stopped checking. The logbook entries became longer. She remembers now. They calm down when you stay. The nights go faster if you don't resist. I tried calling in sick. No one answered. When I didn't show up for a shift, I received a message the next morning. Handwritten, slipped under my apartment door. No envelope, no stamp. They waited. I came back that night without arguing with myself. The child spoke to me for the first time. "Do you hear them too?" he asked, eyes fixed on the window. "Hear who?" I asked. "The ones who are leaving," he said, "outside." The city lights flickered. Somewhere far away, machinery worked through the night. "They're scared," he added. "So am I said. He nodded, as if that made sense. "They don't like when things change," he said. "This place is all they remember." I asked him what would happen when the building was demolished. He looked at me for the first time. "You'll help us stay," he said. It wasn't a question. I checked apartment 417 the next morning. The door opened easily. Inside was a small, ordinary apartment. Lived in, but untouched by time. The furniture was old but clean. The air smelled like tea and dust. On the table lay a stack of papers, my papers, documents I had lost years ago, old photos, a copy of my ID, a lease agreement with my name on it, dated decades earlier. On the wall hung a photograph, me standing in the stairwell watching. After I opened the door to apartment 417, I stopped trying to leave. Not because I decided to stay, because the idea of leaving no longer made sense in the same way. The building had rearranged my thoughts gently, the way you move furniture in a familiar room without noticing until everything feels slightly different. I still went home during the day. I still slept. I still ate, but each of those things felt like maintenance rather than life. The hours outside the building passed quickly without weight. Night, on the other hand, stretched and settled around me. The spirits began to change. They became more solid when I was near. Their movements smoother, their voices clearer. They laughed sometimes, softly, awkwardly, as if remembering how. The woman talked about her husband's job. The child described cars that no longer existed. The man with the keys complained about the trash chute being stuck again. They spoke to me the way neighbors speak to someone who has always lived there. I realized they were adjusting themselves to me, and I was adjusting to them. The first sign that something was wrong came from the outside world. The day guard stopped recognizing me. He looked at my face as if trying to place it, then apologized. "Are you new?" he asked. "I've been here for months," I said. He frowned. "There hasn't been a night attendant assigned for weeks." I laughed, but the sound came out wrong. Too thin, too quiet. That night, my reflection in the guardroom window lagged behind me by a fraction of a second. When I raised my hand, it followed slowly, as if underwater. I didn't look again. The logbook no longer felt like a record. It felt like a conversation. "They feel safer now. You belong here. This is where people wait." I tried, resisting. I truly did. I stopped answering them. I avoided eye contact. I stayed inside the guardroom, lights off, breathing shallow. The building responded immediately. The temperature dropped. Doors slammed. The spirits wandered aimlessly, confused, distressed. A woman knocked on the guardroom door, her voice shaking. "Please," she said, "don't ignore us." Her words hurt more than any threat could have. I opened the door. Everything settled. I started forgetting things. Names, dates, my apartment number outside the building. Friends stopped calling, or maybe they did, and I just didn't notice. My phone felt heavy in my hand, like an object I wasn't meant to use. The city beyond the courtyard grew distant, unreal. The building felt dense, layered, full. One night, I heard heavy machinery nearby, the sound of metal biting into concrete. The spirits froze. The child covered his ears. "They're coming," he whispered. The building reacted. Cracks appeared in the walls, then smoothed over again. Always shifted slightly. Doors opened into spaces that hadn't existed before. Old apartments restored in impossible detail. The building was remembering itself. I felt it pulling at me, not violently, but insistently. They gathered around me in the courtyard, more than I had ever seen at once. Dozens of figures, ordinary people. Tired faces. "You'll stay," the woman said, not as a demand. "As reassurance, you already have," someone else added. I wanted to argue, to scream, to remind them, and myself, that I was alive. But the truth had thinned. I couldn't remember the last time I had seen daylight clearly. I checked the resident list again. My name was still there. This time, a date had been added. The date was tomorrow. The building taught me how to stay, not directly, not with words. It showed me instead, through repetition, through routine, through the quiet relief that settled in the air whenever I did what was expected of me. I began to help. Small things at first, things that didn't feel like surrender. I stood with the woman near the mailboxes when she grew anxious. She asked the same questions every night. I answered them the same way, carefully, gently, never contradicting her. Each time I spoke, her shoulders relaxed. "Thank you," she would say, as if I had done something important. A man with the keys stopped rattling them when I stood nearby. He still didn't throw anything away, but he waited more patiently, eyes fixed on the chute, as if it might open any moment now. The child counted cars slower when I listened. None of this felt dangerous. It felt necessary. When I arrived late one night, the building felt unsettled. Doors creaked more loudly. Footsteps echoed too long. The spirits moved without purpose, drifting instead of repeating their usual paths. "You shouldn't be late," the woman said, not unkindly. "They get confused." "I'm here now," I replied. Everything calmed. I began to understand my role without anyone explaining it. I wasn't a guard. I wasn't even a resident. I was an anchor. The logbook reflected the change. "They're calmer tonight." He stayed by the window until dawn. "You're doing well." I stopped questioning who wrote those lines. Days passed without distinction. My life outside the building continued in theory. Groceries, sleep, the occasional message from someone I barely remembered, but it felt increasingly irrelevant. The building required attention, presence, consistency. I started arriving earlier. Sometimes I stayed after sunrise. The spirits didn't disappear in daylight the way I expected them to. They faded, yes, became quieter, thinner, but they never truly left. They lingered in hallways, sat in stairwells, waited. They waited for night. One morning I realized I had forgotten my apartment key. I stood in front of my own door, searching my pockets with growing frustration, until I felt something cold and solid in my hand. A key, old or not mine. It fit the lock of apartment 417 perfectly. Inside, the apartment felt more complete than before. The furniture was arranged more deliberately. A coat hung by the door. A pair of shoes stood neatly underneath. They were my size. I sat at the table and found a cup of tea waiting for me, still warm. I drank it. That night, someone new appeared. A woman I hadn't seen before stood near the elevator, arms crossed tightly around herself. She looked younger than the others, more alert, afraid. She noticed me immediately. "You can see them too," she said. "Yes," I replied. Her relief was immediate and terrifying. "They said you'd help," she whispered. "Who did?" She glanced around the stairwell, lowering her voice. "The ones who stayed before you." That was the first time I heard it phrased that way. Stayed. I asked her how long she had been there. "I don't know," she said. "I remember going to sleep. I remember waking up and thinking I was late for work." And then she trailed off. "Did you try to leave?" I asked. She nodded. "What happened?" "They asked me not to," she said. "They said it would hurt them." I understood exactly what she meant. The building didn't threaten. It didn't trap. It relied on guilt, on responsibility, on the quiet horror of knowing that leaving would cause suffering, not to monsters but to ordinary people who no longer understood what they were. I told her to sit with us. She did. That night, the spirits were calmer than I had ever seen them. Conversations lasted longer. Laughter appeared, thin, fragile, but real. The building hummed softly, like a machine finally running, at the right speed. In the early hours of the morning, I noticed something outside the window. Lights in apartments that had been dark for years. Across the courtyard, neighboring buildings stood silent. but ours glowed faintly, unevenly, like a city. Remembering how to breathe, I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt proud. I wrote one final line in the logbook before sunrise. Everyone is home. Part 6. The first complaint came from the neighboring building. Someone reported seeing lights on in the empty apartments at night. Another claimed they heard voices, not shouting, not screaming, just conversation drifting through open windows that were supposed to be sealed. The city sent an inspector. I met him in the afternoon, standing near the entrance. He was young, efficient, uncomfortable. He carried a clipboard and avoided looking directly at the building, as if it made him uneasy in a way he didn't want to acknowledge. According to our records, this building is unoccupied, he said. It isn't, I replied. He frowned, checking his papers. There's no active residence permit listed, he said. No utilities. No night staff. I'm here, I said. He looked at me then properly this time. Are you? The question stayed with me long after he left. That night the spirits were restless again. They sensed the inspection the way animals sense weather. They moved more slowly, gathered in corners, whispered to each other, voices overlapping in a low murmur that filled the stairwells. They're talking about us, the woman said. They always do, I replied. She looked at me, searching my face. You won't let them take this away, will you? I didn't answer. The next day, I tried accessing my bank account. It took longer than usual to log in. When it finally loaded, the balance was unchanged, but the transaction history stopped updating weeks ago. My salary hadn't been deposited. I checked my employment contract. The company name didn't exist anymore. I called the number listed on the form. It rang endlessly. In the building, the logbook grew heavier in my hands. The pages felt thicker, denser, as if they carried weight beyond ink and paper. They're nervous. They remember before. You'll stay, won't you? I began receiving mail. Not at my apartment, at the building. Envelopes addressed to me slipped under the door of the guardroom. Utility notices, official letters. A residency confirmation, stamped with a seal I didn't recognize. All of them listed my address as apartment 417. I stopped correcting people when the city workers came to disconnect the remaining power lines. The building resisted, not violently. The lights flickered but didn't go out. The radios turned on in empty rooms. Doors closed themselves gently, firmly, like hands resting on shoulders. The workers left early, unsettled, complaining of headaches and dizziness. That night, the spirits gathered again. They're trying to erase us, someone said. They already did, another replied. A woman took my hand. Her touch was warm. You won't forget us, she said. You're not like the others. What others? I asked. The ones who stayed before, she said. They didn't last. That was when I finally found the old records. Hidden behind the maintenance logs were thin folders, reports written in the same careful, neutral tone. Each one ended the same way. Night attendant, no longer reports for duty. Presumed relocated, no bodies, no investigations, no follow-up, just absence. I wondered how many of them had stood where I stood now, convincing themselves they still had a choice. Outside, demolition. Notices appeared on nearby lampposts. Red ink, official dates. The building watched me read them. The child asked me that night, voice small, what happens to us if you leave? I looked at the figures gathered around me. People who had lived full lives once now reduced to habits and waiting. I don't know, I said. The truth frightened them more than any lie could have. The building sighed. I felt it then, a subtle shift, like a door closing somewhere deep inside me. I realized I hadn't been home in days. I couldn't remember the last time I had seen my reflection in clear daylight. And when I tried to imagine leaving, the thought slid away from me, incomplete, like a word I used to know. I found the first voice by accident. I was reorganizing the guardroom, though I couldn't have said why. The need felt automatic, like cleaning a space that had grown cluttered over time. Behind the cabinet, wedged between the wall and the radiator, lay a small cassette recorder, old, scratched, the kind that needed to be pressed firmly to work. There was no tape inside. When I pressed play, it spoke anyway. If anyone finds this, you need to understand, It doesn't start all at once. The voice was calm, tired, male. I thought I was helping. I thought staying made things better. The recorder clicked off. I didn't move for a long time. That night, the building felt attentive, quiet in a way that suggested listening. I found more, not all in one place, a notebook hidden above ceiling tiles, loose papers taped behind a breaker panel, a phone sealed inside a drawer that no longer had power. Each belonged to someone else. Each told the same story in different words. They had been night attendants, temporary workers, caretakers, guards, people without roots, without anyone waiting for them at home. They had noticed the spirits. They had spoken. They had stayed. One journal ended abruptly, the last page filled with hurried writing. They don't disappear when you leave. They unravel. Another was more careful. It's not punishment. It's replacement. I didn't understand that line at first. The spirits began speaking differently after that. They didn't just talk about routines anymore. They remembered things they hadn't before. Details sharpened, faces became clearer, voices overlapped less. They were stabilizing at the same time something else was thinning. Me. One night, a man approached me in the stairwell. I didn't recognize him at first. He wore modern clothes, too modern. "You can hear them too," he said. "Yes," I replied automatically. He smiled, relieved. "They told me you'd understand," he said. "Who?" I asked. "The ones before," he said. "The quiet ones." That was when I saw it. He cast no reflection in the stairwell mirror. "How long have you been here?" I asked. He hesitated. "Longer than I planned," he said. "Shorter than the building wanted." He explained it slowly, as if afraid the truth might slip away if spoken too quickly. Those who stayed too long didn't vanish. They were absorbed, not eaten, not killed. Reassigned, their habits, their voices, their concern, all of it repurposed. The building learned from them, learned how to keep the others calm, how to speak, how to wait. "What happens when you refuse?" I asked. He looked past me toward the upper floors. "They fracture," he said. "Some fade, some loop, some become noise. And you?" I asked. He shrugged. "I didn't refuse," he said. "I just didn't stay useful." He smiled sadly. "You're doing better." The recorder spoke again that night without being touched. "You don't have to disappear," the voice said. "You just have to be consistent." The building wasn't malicious. It was efficient. It required presence, memory, recognition. Things I was already giving. In the courtyard, the spirits gathered closer than ever before. They spoke to me as one, voices layered but calm. "You remember us," they said. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not pain, not fear, alignment. I realized then what the final role was. I wasn't meant to stay as a person. I was meant to stay as a function. The notice was posted on the entrance door early in the morning. Bright paper official seal. Dates printed in clean, confident font. Demolition scheduled. Final inspection complete. No authorized personnel beyond this point. I stood in front of it longer than necessary, reading the same lines again and again, as if repetition might change their meaning. Behind me, the building was quiet. Not the calm it settled into when everything was right, but a tense, held stillness, like a room waiting for bad news to finish being spoken. The spirits sensed it immediately. They gathered near the entrance that night, closer to the door than ever before. Faces turned toward the notice, though I wasn't sure they could read it. "They're closing it," the woman said. "Yes," I replied. "When?" someone asked. "Soon." The words spread through the building slowly, unevenly. Some understood right away. Others repeated their routines, unaware that the structure holding them was about to change forever. The child stopped counting cars. The man with the keys dropped them. They hit the floor and didn't make a sound. The first workers arrived 2 days later. Not demolition crews, surveyors, men in hard hats, carrying equipment, measuring walls that remembered being touched before. The building resisted them subtly. Doors refused to stay open. One man complained of nausea and had to leave early. Another swore he heard someone whisper his name, though he insisted it must have been a co-worker. I stayed visible, present, useful. They didn't question me. Why would they? The building had already placed me where I belonged. Electricity was cut next. The lights didn't go out, they dimmed, shifted, relocated. Power flowed where it was needed, not where it was assigned. Radios still played softly in empty rooms. Hallways remained illuminated just enough to be navigable. The workers called it faulty wiring. I knew better. The spirits became afraid, not panicked. Afraid in the way people are afraid of losing a home, not of dying. They asked questions I couldn't soften. Where will we go? Will they remember us? What happens when it's gone? I had no answers. At night, the building spoke to me more clearly than ever before. Not with words, with weight, with presence. With the pressure of responsibility settling fully onto my shoulders, it showed me what had happened before. Fragments of memories surfaced, not mine. Previous attendants standing where I stood now, each one holding the building together a little longer, each one failing in a different way. Some left, the spirits unraveled. Some stayed too long without adapting. They were replaced. I adapted. The building was being stripped now, outer layers peeled away. Windows boarded, walls marked with paint. The inside grew denser as the outside thinned. The spirits retreated inward, higher floors, deeper stairwells, rooms that no longer matched their external dimensions. They clustered around me in the evenings. You'll stay, they said, not pleading, reassuring themselves. I'm here, I replied. That was the only answer that worked. On the final night before demolition began in earnest, the city sealed the area. No guards, no lights, no oversight, just me. The building closed around itself, and I felt it then, completely, undeniably. I was no longer waiting with them. I was holding them in place. Part 9, the machines arrived before dawn. I felt them before I heard them. A distant vibration, a low tremor passing through the ground and up into the walls. The building responded by tightening around itself. Hallways narrowing by degrees too small to measure. Doors aligning where they hadn't before. The spirits were quiet. They gathered not in panic, but in order. Standing in familiar places, sitting where they always sat. The woman near the mailboxes, the child by the window. The man with the keys beside the chute. They weren't repeating routines anymore. They were waiting. The building had no more layers to hide behind. Outside, engines idled, voices carried faintly through the sealed entrance. Somewhere, a clipboard was checked, a signal given. I walked the corridors one last time. They felt solid beneath my feet, real in a way the outside world no longer did. I passed doors that led nowhere, stairwells that ended gently instead of abruptly. Spaces shaped not by architecture, but by memory. In apartment 417, the light was on. The table was set. A chair waited for me. I sat down. The woman appeared in the doorway, not crossing the threshold. You don't have to do this, she said. I realized then that she was wrong. Not about the choice, about the time. I had already done it. The first impact came softly. A dull sound, absorbed by layers of concrete and intention. Dust drifted from the ceiling but didn't fall. The spirits didn't react. They remained where they were, watching me, holding. The building shifted inward. The outside noises grew distant, muffled, as if underwater. The walls no longer responded to force. They responded to memory. I felt myself thinning further, not fading, reassigning. Thoughts slowed. Boundaries softened. I stopped thinking in terms of before and after. The second impact came harder. The building flexed, then settled. I stood. I moved into the stairwell, taking my place among them. The woman smiled faintly. The child leaned against the window, counting again. The man picked up his keys. They no longer needed to ask me to stay. I was already where I belonged. Outside, the building collapsed in stages. Inside, it didn't. It compressed, folded. Everything unnecessary peeled away. Time, weight, dimension. What remained was a structure made entirely of remembrance and me. The final sound I heard from the outside world was someone shouting to stop, too late. The logbook rested in my hands. I wrote one last entry, all present, all accounted for, stability achieved. When the noise stopped, so did the waiting. The building no longer existed as a place, it existed as a state, and I was its caretaker.